welcome to this deep dive. You guys wanted us to take a look at The Law by Frederic Bastiat. He was a French economist from the 1800s. Now, when I first saw this on our list, I have to admit, I thought, okay, this is going to be a tough one. But honestly, this essay is like surprisingly relevant even today.
Yeah, it's really incredible.
It's like he had a time machine and saw all the wild stuff happening in our world now.
Oh, absolutely. Bastiat had an incredible foresight into the problems of government, overreach. And in The Law, he very passionately defends individual rights and liberty. It's really a fiery critique of how governments misuse their power, something that I think we can all agree feels very timely.
Absolutely. What really blew my mind was how he predicted things like political lobbying and all the downsides of like government handouts way back then.
Yeah.
It's almost eerie. So let's get into the heart of it. Bastiat, right off the bat, starts by talking about these three fundamental rights: life, liberty, and property.
And he's very clear about these being inherent human rights, not gifts from the government.
Okay.
And that's a key point, because it really sets the stage for his whole argument about the purpose of law.
So it's not about the government granting us these rights, it's about the government protecting rights that we already have. That's a pretty radical idea even today.
It is. It challenges the way a lot of people think about the law.
Yeah.
Bastiat argues that the law's purpose is not to dictate morality. It's not to control the economy or to, engineer some kind of utopia.
Right.
Instead, it should be a shield.
Okay.
To protect individual rights from being violated.
Okay, that makes sense to me. But then he brings up this idea of legal plunder, which sounds pretty intense.
Yeah.
What exactly did he mean by that?
Legal plunder is essentially when the law is twisted to take from one person or a group and give it to another. Even if it's done with, good intentions. He saw this happening, all around him with things like tariffs, subsidies, even things like forced public education.
Wait, hold on. Tariffs and subsidies. Those are pretty common economic policies. How did he see them as plunder?
So Bastiat argued that tariffs, which are basically taxes on imports, artificially protect certain industries.
Right.
At the expense of consumers who end up paying higher prices.
Makes sense.
And subsidies, where the government gives money to favored businesses, well, those distort the market and create this uneven playing field.
So even though it's done through the legal system, he saw it as a form of theft, basically, because it benefits some at the expense of others.
Exactly. And what's even more concerning is that Bastiat argued that this kind of legal plunder, even when it's disguised as helping people, actually erodes our sense of right and wrong.
That's a really interesting point. So it's not just about the economic impact, it's about like the moral consequences.
Exactly.
Can you explain that a little bit more? How does legal plunder warp our sense of what's right and wrong?
Think of it this way. When the law itself becomes a tool for taking from some and giving to others, it blurs the line between what's just and unjust.
Yeah, that
People start to see the law as a way to gain an advantage, even if it means harming others.
makes sense. It's like the law loses its moral authority when it's used for this kind of taking. And I bet this ties into his views on, the people who make the laws, those legislators he talks about. What did he have to say about them?
He was very skeptical of the social engineers of his time, these politicians and intellectuals who believe they can kind of mold society to fit their grand plans. He saw this as a very dangerous concentration of power that really threatened individual liberty.
You can see that playing out even today.
Yeah.
So he was suspicious of anyone basically who claims to have all the answers and thinks they can fix society through laws and regulations.
Precisely. And in fact, he has this famous quote where he said there are too many great men in the world. It's almost as if he foresaw the rise of these larger-than-life political figures who are promising everything under the sun.
It sounds very familiar. So it's not that he was against all government. He was just deeply concerned about the potential for tyranny, even in a democracy.
Exactly.
And this brings us to his view on universal suffrage, right? I remember that being a big part of his argument.
Right. So he did believe in giving everyone the right to vote,
Yep.
but he wasn't naive about it. He warned that it could be corrupted by the same legal plunder mentality.
But wouldn't widespread voting mean more people would try to stop that plunder? Why was he worried about it?
His concern was that if everyone's trying to use the law for their own gain, universal suffrage could just become universal plunder. Instead of a few powerful individuals controlling the system, you just have the majority using the law to take from the minority.
So it's not enough to just have the right to vote. It's about what principles are guiding those who hold power.
Exactly.
That's a pretty sobering thought.
It is, and it makes you really think about the responsibilities that come with living in a democracy. You can't just assume that having the right to vote will automatically lead to a just society. We have to be very vigilant about protecting those individual rights and limiting the scope of government power.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground and we're just getting started. So to recap, Bastiat argued that the law should protect our inherent rights, not be used for this legal plunder. And while he supported universal suffrage, he worried about the potential for the majority to exploit the minority through the law.
Exactly. He lays a really powerful foundation in this first part of the law, setting the stage for his defense of individual liberty and a free market system, which we'll dive into next. Welcome back. So we just explored Bastiat's critique of legal plunder and how he really felt it undermined the foundation of a just society. Now I think it's time to shift gears a little bit and look at what he proposes as like a better path forward.
Okay, because if so far it's been a pretty bleak picture. He wasn't just like a doom and gloom guy, right?
Not at all. Bastiat was a huge believer in the power of individual liberty. It wasn't just about pointing out the problems, he wanted to offer solutions. And it all comes back to those three fundamental rights, right? Life, liberty, and property.
Right, okay. So how do those rights translate into a better society? It's not like just having the right to life, automatically makes for a good life.
Right. It's about what people can actually do with those rights when they're truly protected. Bastiat believed that when people are free to pursue their own interests without all the interference from the government, it creates a much more harmonious and prosperous society. And he saw the free market as like the prime example of this.
Okay, I'm listening, but I'm also a little skeptical.
Hmm.
The free market, can be brutal. There are winners and losers. How did Bastiat address that?
He argued that the free market, while it's not perfect, ultimately is a reflection of human nature. We all have needs, we have desires, and we are constantly striving to improve our lives. In a free market, individuals have the power to make choices that they think will benefit them and their families.
Okay, but how does that benefit society as a whole, though? Isn't it just like a bunch of individuals looking out for themselves?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. Bastiat argues that the beauty of the free market is that this pursuit of individual self-interest actually leads to collective good.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that being selfish makes the world a better place?
Not selfish, exactly. Think of it more as individuals making choices based on what they value. Every time you buy something, you're engaging in this voluntary exchange. You're giving up something you value less, your money, for something you value more, the product, the service.
Right.
And the seller is doing the exact same thing. So it's this win-win situation.
Okay, I get that. But what about those who don't have much to offer in this exchange? What about, the poor or the vulnerable?
Right, and that is a crucial point. And Bastiat did not shy away from this. He was actually very opposed to using the law to force charity or redistribute wealth. He did not think that government programs were the answer to poverty.
So he just wanted to let the poor fend for themselves in this free market system. That seems harsh.
No, that wasn't his point at all. Bastiat believed that true charity should come from, compassion, from voluntary action, not from government force. He felt that forced charity through things like taxes and welfare programs was not only ineffective, but could actually make things worse.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Explain that a little bit more. Why did he think government help would backfire?
He saw a couple of big problems. First, he argued that when the government takes on the role of provider, it actually undermines individual responsibility.
Yeah.
So people become dependent on these handouts instead of empowered to create a better life for themselves.
So it's like the government becomes a crutch, preventing people from reaching their full potential.
Exactly. And secondly, he argued that these government programs often create a system where special interests are benefiting at the expense of the very people they are supposed to be helping.
Oh, yeah, I can see that happening. All the bureaucratic layers and people just fighting for their slice of the pie.
Exactly. And those with the loudest voices or the most political influence, they get the biggest share, while those who truly need help get kind of lost in the shuffle.
So if he was so against government intervention,
Yeah.
how did he propose, to address poverty and inequality?
Bastiat believed that the best way to help the poor wasn't through handouts, but by creating an economy where everyone had a real opportunity to succeed. He saw the free market as an engine for prosperity, generating wealth and creating jobs.
Okay, but doesn't a thriving economy also lead to more inequality?
Oh.
With the rich just getting richer?
Well, he argued that a free market, when it's combined with limited government and a real respect for property rights, benefits everyone, even if, some benefit more than others. He saw a thriving economy as this rising tide that lifts all boats, creating more opportunities for everybody to improve their lives.
I guess the question is, how do we balance that freedom of the market with the need to protect those who are most vulnerable? It sounds like Bastiat was pretty idealistic about the power of the free market to solve social problems.
He was, and some would argue that he underestimated the potential for exploitation and inequality in a truly free market. But he sincerely believed that when people are free to pursue their own interests, it creates this really dynamic and innovative society that benefits everyone.
It's a complex issue for sure. And it sounds like his view wasn't just about economics. He saw this connection between, individual liberty and morality.
Absolutely. He believed that a free society actually fosters greater morality. He argued that when people are free to make their own choices and are held accountable for their actions, they're much more likely to develop virtues like self-reliance, prudence, and just respect for others.
So it's like freedom isn't just about doing whatever you want. It's about becoming like a better person.
Exactly. He believed that true moral growth comes from within, not from being forced by the government to behave a certain way.
Okay, I'm starting to see, the depth of his thinking here. He wasn't just some like laissez-faire ideologue who wants to abolish all rules. He was a deep thinker. He saw the connection between economics, politics, morality. It's all connected.
And what's really remarkable is how relevant his ideas remain even today.
Yeah.
We are still wrestling with these questions about the role of government, the balance between individual freedom, collective responsibility, even the nature of true charity.
So even though he was writing in the 1800s, his ideas still have something to teach us today.
Absolutely. Bastiat's work is really a call to think critically about the consequences of government action, the importance of taking personal responsibility, and just the power of freedom to create a better world.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about. So far, we've covered his critique of legal plunder, his argument for individual liberty as like the foundation of a prosperous and moral society.
And to round out our deep dive, in the next part, we are going to explore a slightly more surprising topic, Bastiat's views on peace and war.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the law by Frederic Bastiat. We've covered a lot of ground. His critique of government overreach, his passionate defense of individual liberty, and his belief in the power of free markets. Now we're going to explore a topic that might seem a bit unexpected, like his views on peace and war.
Yeah, it might seem like a shift, but it really flows directly from his core principles. Bastiat believed there was this really deep connection between freedom and peace.
Okay, so I can see how, someone who really values individual liberty wouldn't be a huge fan of war. But how did he connect those two ideas?
Well, he saw war as fundamentally incompatible with individual rights. It's the ultimate act of coercion. It forces people to sacrifice their lives, their property, all for the sake of the state.
So he's not just talking about the horrors of war, which are undeniable, but making a philosophical point about how war violates those principles he holds so dear.
Exactly. And remember his idea of legal plunder? Well, he saw war as legal plunder, but on a massive scale. Governments use their power to just seize resources, conscript soldiers, inflict violence on other nations, all in the name of some kind of national interest.
So he's taking those same principles of justice and individual rights, and he's applying them to the international arena. It's like he's saying governments shouldn't be able to violate the rights of people in other countries any more than they can violate the rights of their own citizens.
That's a great way to put it. He argued that just like the law should protect individuals from, theft and violence within a country, it should also protect them from aggression and plunder from other nations.
Okay, that makes sense. But wasn't Bastiat, a Frenchman? France has a long history of military intervention.
Yeah.
How did he kind of reconcile those pacifist views with his own country's actions?
Well, he didn't shy away from it at all. In fact, Bastiat was a very strong critic of French imperialism. He condemned those wars, those conquests that France had undertaken, arguing that they were not only morally wrong, but also economically disastrous.
So he was willing to call out his own country, even when it was probably really unpopular.
Absolutely. He believed that true patriotism wasn't about blind loyalty, it was about holding your own government accountable to those same principles of justice that should apply to all nations.
It's a powerful statement. It's a good reminder that patriotism isn't about agreeing with everything your country does. It's about wanting it to live up to its highest ideals.
Yeah, and this leads into Bastiat's vision for, like, a more peaceful world. He believed that the best way to prevent war was to promote free trade and, like, open borders between nations.
Right. I remember him being a big advocate for free trade, but how did he see that leading to peace?
Well, he argued that when countries are engaging in this free and voluntary exchange, they become economically interdependent, right? And their prosperity is all intertwined, which makes war, well, much less appealing.
So it's like trade creates this web of mutual benefit where countries have more to gain from cooperation than from conflict.
Exactly. He really believed that free trade not only created economic wealth, but it fostered, understanding and goodwill between nations. It breaks down those barriers. It encourages cultural exchange. It helps people see each other as partners, not as enemies.
Okay, I like the idea, but let's be realistic. Can free trade really prevent all wars? I mean, there are deeper conflicts, a lot of times things rooted in ideology, religion, historical grievances. Can those things really be resolved just through trade?
You're right. It's not a magic bullet. Bastiat wouldn't have claimed that free trade was some kind of cure-all. He recognized that there will always be the potential for conflict between nations. But he felt that by fostering this economic interdependence, by reducing those incentives for, plunder and conquest, free trade could significantly reduce the likelihood of war.
So it's less about guaranteeing peace. It's more about like creating the conditions that would make peace a little more likely.
Exactly. He saw free trade as one of the most powerful tools we have for promoting peace. But he also recognized the need for diplomacy, for international cooperation, and that strong commitment to individual rights to really build a more peaceful world.
It's a really complex issue, but I appreciate his nuanced perspective on it. It's not like naive idealism. It's more like, a pragmatic approach to reducing conflict and promoting that cooperation.
Yeah, and that's what makes Bastiat so compelling, right? He was a realist, but he was also an optimist. He believed that ideas could change the world, and he challenged us to imagine a future where individual liberty, free markets, and peace could prevail.
Well, this deep dive has definitely lived up to its name. We have explored so much of Bastiat's thought, his fiery critique of legal plunder, his really nuanced view of universal suffrage, and that really inspiring vision of a world where freedom and peace can go hand in hand.
And even though the law was written, over 170 years ago, it still feels so incredibly relevant today. His insights into the nature of government, the importance of individual rights, and the dangers of that unchecked power, they still resonate with us.
Yeah, it's a reminder that fight for a free and just and peaceful society, it's ongoing, and it's a fight worth having. Thanks for joining us on this intellectual adventure, everybody. I hope you've gained some new insights, some food for thought from this.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you. And remember, as Bastiat reminds us, the pursuit of a better world requires us to think critically, to challenge assumptions, and to never give up on that fight for liberty.